Okay, today we're going to be learning Pesachim Daf Mem Gimel. Before we start, I'll just remind everybody that next week we're starting the class dedicated to learning skills, how to learn Gemara, getting more in depth into Gemara. It'll be offered both in Hebrew and in English. I'll be teaching the English. Rabbi Chana Dreyfus will be teaching the Hebrew. The whole course is in conjunction with Yeshivat Risha, together with Hadran. You have to register to take the course, whether you're going to take it live or whether you're going to take it, again, live, meaning on Zoom, or whether you're going to do it on your own time, which is also a possibility, but it needs registration. It's built as a course. All the materials will be, once you register, you'll receive them. Everything is free. You don't have to pay to register, so please register. It's at hadran.org.il/courses. Okay, we're going to start. Today's daf is sponsored by Professor Jonathan Ben Ezra and Dr. Robin Zeiger on the yurt side of Jonathan's father, Aaron Ben Ezra Zichrono Livracha. He was passionate about Jewish learning and worked diligently so that both his son and daughter would have a quality Jewish education. And by Avi Hoffman in honor of Perel Mendel Bat Menachem Mendel Imi Morati. Okay, we're going to start at the bottom of Membet Amudbet at the last two lines. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Afsha Tachshitei Nashim. Let's just review the Mishnah. The Mishnah we were discussing was a Mishnah about. We discussed that the words Elu Ovrim were a bit complicated, different opinions offered by the Rishonim as to what exactly it means by Elu Ovrim. They have to be either just taken off the table, or they have to be destroyed, or they have to, you're obligated if they're in your house, Bal Yera'eh, Bal Yimatzeh. And we talked about the Kutach HaBavli, Shechar Madi. All those were basically mixtures of chametz in something else. The main thing you have to understand about mixtures is it's not like there's a piece of bread mixed in with something else. No, it's that it got mixed in and you no longer can identify it as bread. It gets absorbed, something happened to it. Okay, it's dissolves. Okay, that's what Rashi says specifically, that it dissolved. So we're talking about chametz that got mixed up with something, the chametz dissolved, you no longer see it. Okay, like in the kutach and the shechar and the chometz and all those things, right? You can imagine in vinegar, you don't really see chametz. And then we have this issue of chametz nuksha. Chametz nuksha is one of two things. Either it's something that didn't yet fully leaven, or we're going to see it's also possibly something inedible. It has chametz in it, but it's not edible. That's chametz nuksha. Okay, and we're going to see this right now with the tachshitei nashim. So again, what did our Mishnah say about all these things? This is just a good review before we start, because we're going to get into all these issues. At the end of the Mishnah, it said, Zeh haklal, this is the rule, kol shehu mimin dagan, if it comes from one of the grains, harei zeh over b'Pesach. Then you're obligated on Pesach, which means if there's a min dagan that's mixed up in something, or it came close to leavening, harei elu ba'azhara ve'ein behem mishum karet. Okay, so first of all, it said harei zeh over b'Pesach. Over again, all depends on how you defined it in the beginning of the Mishnah, but it seems to be it's somehow forbidden. It's just not not clear how far it's forbidden. And then it says when you eat chametz on Pesach, you're obligated, you're liable for karet. Remember, that means you get cut off. We're not exactly sure exactly how, but something in the hands of God. Either you die young, your children die before you, something along those lines. But if you do ta'arovet, a mixture of chametz or chametz nuksha, then it's only bilav. Okay, it's a lo ta'aseh. We're going to see there's a machloket about this later today. We're going to see who does our Mishnah hold like. But now we're going to talk about af tachshitei nashim, jewelry of women. Now, jewelry of women seems quite strange. Whoever said jewelry has chametz in them, my jewelry generally does not have chametz in it. So what are we talking about? So the Gemara, of course, asked that question immediately. Tachshitei nashim salkadatach? What are you talking about? There's no chametz in that. Ela ema, thanks Gita for the macaroni necklace. Nachon, you could have macaroni necklaces that your children make, but I don't believe that that's what they were referring to. Ela ema af tipulei nashim. He didn't actually mean jewelry. Now, it's funny, I'm laughing about the macaroni necklaces, but theoretically, it could be that in the time of the Mishnah, again, these are issues of reality differences. In the time of the Mishnah, it could be in Israel, there were necklaces that were made out of some substance. Possibly, there were some type of jewelry that was made out of something edible, but I'm not sure how likely that is. In any case, they say what we're talking about is tipulei nashim, which means some sort of cream that women use that have chametz in it. We all know that before Pesach, they come out with all these lists of, what medicines have chametz in them, what hair products and other kind of products that we use, cosmetic products that have chametz in them. And this is where it comes from. that even though, and this is where I said chametz nuksha could also be something inedible, but because it has chametz in it, we can't have it. So again, it all depends. What does it mean we can't have it? Is it bal yematzeh, or is it just you have to put it away? Okay, not right. That was the debate of the Rishonim in the Mishnah. But he says even tipulei nashim. And what are these tipulei nashim? What are we referring to? Amar Rav Yudah Amar Rav Bnei Yisrael shegiu lepirkam v'lo higiu l'shanim. Okay, the first explanation of this is it's pshat. The Koran brings another explanation, a different version of this. But the first is children, girls, who basically reach pirkam but not shanim. That means they're not yet 12, but they have bodily hair. So what they want to do, they wanted to get rid of it because they felt like it just looks weird. I'm a young girl, I have bodily hairs, I shouldn't. So they would get rid of it. And then we talked about this before, the depilatory creams, benot aniyin toflototam b'sid, they would use plaster or lime. Benot ashirot toflototam b'solet. They would use some sort of solet. So here you see, solet is that fine flour. The substance that the wealthy women used was made from flour, and that's the one that's chametz nuksha. Benot malachim b'shemen hamor. The very, like there's the wealthy, and then there's the royalty. The royalty, they would use shemen hamor. How do we know this? In a minute, we'll see what shemen hamor is. My shemen hamor. Shene'emar, shisha chodashim b'shemen hamor. This is known from the Megillat Esther, when Esther went to the house of the king. Remember, and they did the 6 months. They were with the shemen hamor, preparing them for seeing the king. So here you see it was creams that they put on these women. Okay, some people say this. So as I said, the Koran had a different explanation. Giul perkam v'lo higiu l'shanim was a different version. It was that they had, to remember now, it was that they, all right, he quotes the Aruch. He said, they reached the age of maturity, but right, it's the opposite. They weren't showing signs of maturity. So because of that, they put cream on to actually expedite hair growth, which is interesting. So in any case, there's 2 different explanations to who this is referring to. In any case, you see also women were using this. It wasn't just those, in this situation, but that is, you have a statement about it that shows that people use this. Okay, next, Rav Huna bar Yirmiyah Amar. So my shemen hamor, what exactly is shemen hamor? So Rav Huna bar Yirmiyah Amar stachat. Okay, that doesn't really help us, but he says it's a certain thing that they knew is stachat. Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba Amar shemen zayit shelo hivi shlish. It's olive oil that they took from olives that hadn't yet reached a third of their ripening, and therefore they would make olive oil out of that, and that's what they would use on their skin. Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer Anpikanin Shemen Zayit Shelo Hivi Shlish. He gives another name to it. It's not clear to me if he's disagreeing or he's just saying it's another name for this same thing that they call shemen hamor, is also called Anpikanin. And then it's also unclear whether this is a continuation of that Braita or this is going back, referring to what we said previously, the Lama Sachinoto, and why would they put this on? Because it both helps with hair removal and also smooths the skin. So this is what we must be referring to about tachshitei nashim. Zehaklal. So now they say this is the rule. Kol shehu mimin dagan. So now what do we say about these things? If they're mimin dagan, what do we say? Then hareze over bepesach. So the Mishnah, let's look at the structure of the Mishnah. The Mishnah listed 7 items that are problematic. And then it listed a general rule. So the Gemara says, or actually it's not even the Gemara. The Gemara brings a Braita where Rabbi Yeshua basically asks a question on our Mishnah. Amar Rabbi Yeshua, they already told you the rule that if there's some dagan in it, it's going to be a problem. So why did they list all these different types of foods? Isn't it obvious, right? If you say the rule, you don't need to list specific examples, right? And the point is, maybe it's just these examples, but obviously, no, you have to bring the rule because it's not just those examples. Those examples are indicative of other cases that might be the same. So once you give the rule, you don't really need the specific examples. So they give an interesting answer. He says, it's so that you're familiar with these food items and their names. This, by the way, explains maybe why most of the cases in the Mishnah are called kuta chabavli, shechar madi, chometz edomi, zaytoma mitzri. They're all coming from, right, the first 4 anyway, are from different countries. Because if you remember, we talked about kutach was different things in different countries. There was the regular kutach and then there was the kuta chabavli. And not all kutach had the same ingredients, and not all, right? We said the chometz edomi had barley in it, whereas other ones didn't. So this is the kind of thing that, especially if you're talking about things that are brought from afar, or by the way, I saw a discussion, maybe it was in Safrai, they said, it could be they were brought from Mitzrayim, or it could be that, or Edom, or wherever it might be, or it could be that they prepared the dishes, just like nowadays, we prepare all sorts of dishes, not only authentic Israeli or authentic American or authentic wherever you live, right? But we all prepare different types of things. It could be that they prepared them, but again, they were different. The ingredients were different if you called it this. So it's very important to know the names of these items, since the chametz is not distinguishable. You have to know which one has chametz in it and which one doesn't, which reminds us of these lists that we have, right? There's many products that we don't even know have chametz in them. That's why you need the list to tell you. So it's the exact same idea here. And then they give you an example of a story where this was very important to know. It happens to not have anything to do with Pesach, it does have to do with the kutach, habavli, and where it was very important that somebody knew what a name meant, because otherwise he would never have known. He would have, we'll see in a minute, he would have ended up eating milk and meat together. So there was a person, Kihadahu bar ma'arava, there was a guy from Israel, De'ikla leBavel, he comes to Babylonia. Hava bisra bahadeh, he had meat with him. He was planning to eat meat. Amar lehu, he asked the people around him, krivu li matkilta, can you bring me something to eat with my bread, a dip? Shama de ka'amre, krivu le kutach, he heard them saying, give him kutach. Kevan de shama kutach, perash. As soon as he heard kutach, he realized, oh, this is dairy, I can't eat it. Okay, so it was important. If you didn't know what kutach habavli is, you wouldn't know that it had milk in it. It's very important to know, right? This also, what do I think about? The fact that we have ingredients on every, right? You buy something in the store, this package, it comes with all the ingredients. You know what's in it. So you know, is it dairy, is it not? Besides hashgacha, and it says dairy or parv. But it's important to know always what's inside what you're eating. And in those days, they obviously didn't have wrappers with printed, this is what's in it. So it's very important to know. And that's what they're saying. That's why our Mishnah goes into the listing of what these items are. And even if you say it's not just, by the way, we had the Zoman Shel Tzaba'in and Amilan Shel Tabachim. Again, if you're not a tabach or you're not a tzaba or you're not a sofer, you wouldn't necessarily know, or in the end we said it was a shoemaker. But if you're not one of those professions, you might not know what goes inside, how they're made, because you don't normally make it yourself. So again, all of these are items that you wouldn't necessarily know what they were on your own. Likewise with the women, they might not know what's in it. They put this cream on. They have no idea, is there solid inside or is it made from seed? They didn't know the difference probably. So it's very important to know what you're eating or what you're using, especially when it comes to Pesach. Now we're going to start in a long sugya, which is basically going to take us till the end of the daf, which is these are a lo ta'aseh. Okay, if you eat these things, asur lo ta'aseh, that means you get malkot, you don't get karet. Okay, they're not as severe. Again, we're talking about our two categories. One is chametz nuksha and one is chametz b'ta'arovet, a mixture. Man tana de chametz dagan gamor al yedei ta'arovet v'nuksha be'ene belav. Who is the Tana who basically holds like our Mishnah and says that chametz dagan gamor, if it's real chametz mixed up and dissolved into some mixture, it's a problem. And nuksha be'ene, which means the nuksha itself, not mixed up in a tarovet, but it's actual, it just hasn't fully leavened or it's inedible. So how do we know that those are asur below ta'aseh? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Rabbi Meir. This must be Rabbi Meir's shita. We're going to have two approaches. One is to say it's Rabbi Meir, one is to say it's Rabbi Eliezer. So first we'll deal with Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, who says it's Rabbi Meir. Ditanya. Seor yisaref. Seor is not seor. Seor is, we're going to call chametz nuksha. It's when you leave a dough to rise and it reaches a certain stage, but it doesn't reach the end stage. And now there's going to be a debate in the Mishnah on Daf Memchet, which I brought on your sheet. If you have the sheet in front of you, you can also just flip to Memchet Amubet. Okay, I'll read now from there for a minute. Seor yisaref ha'ochlo patur, has to be burned, but if you eat it, you're exempt. Siduk yisaref ha'ochlo chayav kared. Okay, once it cracks entirely, then it's definitely a problem. These are stages of the leavening process, but there's a debate between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda about what stage is seor. Okay, not so clear. So ezu seor, first we're going to see Rabbi Yehuda, kekarnech hagavim, like the antenna of a grasshopper. Okay, what does this mean? I don't know if you've, right, you leave a dough to rise, what happens? So the first stage is what Rabbi Meir says. I'll skip for a minute to Rabbi Meir, which is actually quoted here in the Chachamim as Chachamim, but they call it Rabbi Meir after. Chachamim omrim, Okay, zev zeh ochlo chayav karet, ve'ezeu se'ol. It says, what's se'ol? Kol shechsifu panav ka'adam shamdu sarotav. Once it starts to harden, the outside, okay, when it starts to get a little crusty, if you leave a dough to rise and you don't cover it, right, that's why normally we cover it. It starts to get a little crusty. After it gets crusty, it starts to crack. So what Rabbi Yehuda says is, it's not when it gets crusty. Rabbi Meir says when it gets crusty, that's already se'ul. According to Rabbi Yehuda, once it gets crusty and then starts to crack, and you see these little cracks like grasshopper antenna, that's when we say that's already going to be called chametz nuksha. So now going back to our topic, our Gemara. So this Braita says, se'or yisaref, okay? Then it says, v'notno lekalbo. Now something here doesn't make any sense. If it's supposed to be burnt, then you can't give it to your dog. So first it says you have to burn it, and then it says, and you give it to your dog. So we'll have to explain in a minute what this is talking about. V'ha'ochlo ba'arba'in, and the one who eats it gets lashes. So now they say, wait a minute. Hagufa kasha, something doesn't make sense here. Amart se'or yisaref, alma asor b'hana. If it has to be burnt, that means you can't benefit from it. But hadar tani, then it says, notno lefnei kalbo, alma mutar b'hana. From here one can infer it's permitted to benefit from. So how do we explain this? Hachi kamal, se'or yisaref. Okay, so now we're going to explain, this is why I mentioned the machloket Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda. It's going to be a little tricky to understand, but hopefully you'll get it. Hachi kamar, se'or yisaref means De Rabbi Meir leRabbi Meir and de Rabbi Yehuda leRabbi Yehuda. In other words, according to Rabbi Meir, his definition of seor, which is hichsifu panav, the earlier stage, you have to burn. And Rabbi Yehuda, who says seor is the later stage, once it looks like these antennae, it starts to crack a little. According to him, if it gets to that stage, then it has to be burnt. So both of them agree that according to their own definition of what it means to get to chametz nuksha, once it becomes chametz nuksha, you have to burn it. But then Hadatane, about v'notno lefnei kalbo. When it says you give it to your dog, what is that referring to? Do Rabbi Meir leRabbi Yehuda? It's Rabbi Meir's approach to Rabbi Yehuda's. It's Rabbi Yehuda's approach to Rabbi Meir's definition. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, the early stage that you say Rabbi Meir is a problem, that's the stage where I think you can't eat it, but you can feed it to your dog still. So if it just started crusting up, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that you could actually give to your dog. V'ha'ochlo ba'arba'in. Now this last line, and this is the one that's mainly important to us, because what are we looking for? We're looking for someone who says, okay, maybe I should even preface this from the beginning. I should tell you this from the beginning. We're basically, what are we looking for? We said this from the beginning. We're looking for which Tana says both chametz nuksha and chametz b'tarovet are below taseh. The reason why we're going to have a debate is because we can't find any Tana that says both. It's going to be, we say it by one, and then we can infer the other. So we're going to find that Rabbi Meir says, ha'ochlo ba'arba'im, atan the Rabbi Meir. When they explain this Braita, they say, who says you get lashes here? That's Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says, if it's called se'or and it's chametz nuksha, it gets to that stage where it's not fully leavened, but it's starting to leaven. That's Rabbi Meir, and he thinks you get lashes. So now they have to make a jump, because all he said was chametz nuksha. He wasn't talking about actual chametz that got into a mixture, right, and is dissolved now. So Sham'ina leila Rabbi Meir nuksha be'ene bilav. Once he says that nuksha, actual nuksha, right, where it's not mixed in any sort of mixture, is going to be forbidden. Kol shekain chametz dagan gamor yidei ta'arovet. So all the more so, if something fully leavened, even if it's in a mixture and it's no longer visible, still it was actual real chametz that leavened. So of course he's going to say that. Now, when we get to the second answer, we're going to do the reverse. We're going to say, oh no, if you hold chametz b'tarovet, then obviously chametz nuksha. Okay, so we're going to use the same logic twice. That's why I wouldn't even question this logic, because one could argue it either way, right? Because each one has a certain strength about it. The chametz nuksha is there in actuality. You see it. It's not dissolved in something else. On the other hand, it hasn't yet fully leavened. And the chametz that's b'tarovet has fully leavened. On the other hand, you can't see it. So one could argue, and that's why Rabbi Yehuda argues it one way. Rav Nachman's going to argue it the other way. So again, we're starting with Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda thinks, in the name of Rav, that Rabbi Meir said, chametz nuksha b'tarovet, chametz nuksha is belav, is forbidden from the Torah. You get lashes for it. If he says it by chametz nuksha, obviously he'll say it by chametz b'tarovet, because that already leavened. That's the logic. Rav Nachman Amar, Rabbi Eliezer Tanya. Okay, now we're going to have Rabbi Eliezer, who basically proves from the Torah that a tarovet is forbidden by a lo taseh. And then once we have ta'arovet, we can assume he would obviously say the same for chametz nuksha. Okay, that's the basic argument between the two. Titania, as it says in a braita, al chametz dagan gamur anush karet. Right? If you eat chametz, actual chametz that leavened, then you obviously get karet. We know that. Va'al eruvo belav. And if it's in a mixture and it's dissolved, it's only going to be a lo taseh. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. V'chachamim omrim al chametz dagan gamur anush karet al eruvo belo klum. This is a very interesting approach. The rabbis say, no, it's either or. And it's not, there's no middle position. They basically say, if it's real chametz, you get karet. If it's in a mixture, you don't get anything, meaning no lashes. Now, what does this actually mean? Does this mean it's forbidden, you don't get lashes? Everyone's going to agree, all the Rishonim, that it's forbidden. The question is it forbidden only by rabbinic law or by Torah law? Where would you see? If you look at the people who list the mitzvot, right, like the Rambam and the Ramban are of the most famous. So they list the mitzvot. The Rambam lists this as a mitzvah. You can't eat a tarovet of chametz. Even though he doesn't think you get lashes, he understands the rabbis say it's just not forbidden that by punishment, but it is forbidden by Torah law. And the Ramban jumps on him and says, what are you talking about? It says here, no. So yeah, you could also have the Sefer Chinuch. I happen to just notice the Rambam and the Ramban. I don't know what the Sefer Chinuch says about it. I didn't check, but the Rambam and the Ramban have a whole machloka because the Ramban always has his notes on the Rambam and he argues with him. And he said, what are you talking about? The Chachamim say it's not anything. And therefore he thinks, again, obviously it's forbidden by rabbinic law, but it's not forbidden by Torah law according to the Ramban, and therefore he doesn't list it as a separate mitzvah. So for homework, you can check what the Sefer Chinuch says. Okay, so moving on. So now they say, okay, so Vishamin alei Rabbi Eliezer. So now where's Rav Nachman's logic? So Rabbi Eliezer says, Damar chametz dagan gamor al yidei ta'arovet belav. So going back to Rabbi Eliezer, he says it's belav. So kol shekain nuksha be'enei. All the more so then, if it's nuksha and it's there, right? Because again, it's not mixed in, dissolved. Again, this is all, you can argue this logic either which way. But since he says one, we're going to assume obviously the other one. For Rav Nachman, now we're going to have the obvious. My time alo amar ka Rav Yehuda. Why didn't he hold like Rav Yehuda? And in the end, Rav Yehuda. And in the end, this isn't going to be a satisfying answer. He's basically just going to say, because I hold by the opposite logic. Okay. Amar lecha dilma ad kamlo ka amar Rabbi Meir hatam ela nuksha be'enei. Maybe when Rabbi Meir said nuksha, that's because it's in actuality there. Aval chametz dagan gamor yidei ta'arovet lo. But even if it's real chametz, once it gets dissolved, you don't see it anymore. Maybe it wouldn't be a problem. And Rav Yehuda, my time alo amar Rav Nachman. Why didn't he agree with Rav Nachman? Because amar lecha ad kamlo ka amar Rabbi Eliezer hatam ela chametz dagan gamor yidei ta'arovet. Rabbi Eliezer said ta'arovet is forbidden by Torah law, and it's a lo taseh, and you get lashes. That's only because it's actual chametz, it leavened fully. Aval nuksha be'enei lo amar, but nuksha, no. Tanya kavatei de Rav Yehuda. So first we're going to bring a braita for Rav Yehuda, and then we're going to have a long discussion. It's going to take a whole amud into Rabbi Eliezer's position. Tanya kavatei de Rav Yehuda. So first we're going to bring a braita to support Rav Yehuda's reading. Kol machmetzet lo tochelu. Okay, there's a pasuk that says, we're going to learn these psukim much more in depth in another minute, but it says, don't eat any machmetzet. Okay, what does that mean? What does that come to include? L'rabot kuta chabavli v'shechar hamadi v'chometz edomi v'zei toma mitzri. Okay, and you list the 4 things that we saw, 4 out of the 7 we saw in our Mishnah, which are all what? These are all ta'arovot. These are things that have chametz mixed in with them. So according to this source, it says ta'arovet is a problem, right? Is a lo taseh, because it's learned from kol machmetzet lo tochelu. Yachol yeheh anush karet. You might have thought you get karet for this. Talmud lomal ki kol ochel chametz v'nichrita. There's another verse that says if you eat chametz, you get karet. So that seems to imply al chametz dagan gamur anush karet va'ale ruvo belav. Since this verse of kol machmetzet lo tochelu doesn't say karet, and the pasuk about chametz says karet, we're going to assume chametz karet. That's when the chametz is there in actuality. When it's just in a mixture, it's only going to be belav. Now, what do you notice about this? Which items in our Mishnah didn't they list? They didn't list chametz nuksha. So what do you see here? Whoever holds eruv bilav, ta'arovet is a mixture, is a lo taseh, obviously doesn't hold nuksha because he would have said it in this braita. So who's the one who says, so man shamat le da'amar ale ruvo bilav? That's Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer is the one who says that a ta'arovet is a lo taseh. V'ilu nuksha be'enei lo ka'amar. And notice what was missing here. It didn't say anything about nuksha. Therefore, shmamina nuksha le Rabbi Eliezer lately. So therefore, he concludes from this braita that it must be that he doesn't hold nuksha is isur lo taseh. Okay, and therefore Rabbi Eliezer is not the one talking in our Mishnah who lists them all, because the author of that Braita is Rabbi Eliezer, and that Braita clearly leaves out nuksha. And therefore this Braita supports Rabbi Yehuda's reading that it's really Rabbi Meir and not Rabbi Eliezer. Now, as I said, we're going to deal with Rabbi Eliezer, and before we start, I want you to see the verses. I brought them on the sheet, where you can look at them if you have a Tanakh or access to one. So in Shmot Yud Bet, there's 3 verses that we're going to, the rest of today is going to be mostly drashot on these 3 verses. So they're all in Shmot Perek Yud Bet, okay, Exodus chapter 12. It says in Pasuk Tevav, verse 15, Shivat Yamim Matzot Tochelu, remember this famous one, right? 7 days you eat matzah. Ach bayom harishon tashbitu sor mibatechem, but on the first day get rid of your chametz. Remember we learned that was Erev Pesach. Ki kol ochel chametz v'nichrita nefesh hayim Yisrael. Okay, anyone who eats chametz will get karet. Okay, that's the first verse. The second one is verse 19, a few psukim later. Shivat yamim seor lo yimatzeh bebatechem. For 7 days you can't find any leaven in your house. Ki kol ochel machmetzet v'nichrita nefesh hayim Yisrael. Anyone who eats machmetzet, which is from the root of chametz, but it's a bit of a different word. We're going to darshan what's the meaning of chametz versus machmetzet, is going to get karet. Then the next verse says, kol machmetzet lo tochelu. Don't eat any machmetzet. Now the verse before said, if you eat machmetzet, you get karet. This verse doesn't say karet. So what is Rabbi Eliezer darshan? This is what we saw before. Now you'll understand this Rasha a little better. He says, this says kol machmetzet. And it says lo tochelu, but it doesn't say karet. So it must be you don't get karet. It must be, it's just a regular lo taseh because it says lo tochelu. And according to him, what does that include? It includes a mixture, okay? Chametz mixed in with something with, right, which you no longer see, like the kuta chabavli and the tejoma mitzri and all those other things we saw listed. So now the Gemara is going to talk about his approach. For Rabbi Eliezer, a revo belav minale. So where does he get it from? Which we already saw, but they're just repeating. Dichtiv kol machmetzet lo tochelu. Well, if that's the case, the Gemara says, wait a minute. If the verse before it said anyone who eats machmetzet is nichrita gets karet, and the verse after said kol machmetzet lo tochelu, whatever's included in machmetzet, which according to you, Rabbi Eliezer, is a combination, a mixture with chametz mixed in and dissolved, then we should assume machmetzet, fill in the blank. If it says machmetzet above and it says karet, that must include also a mixture, and therefore it should be karet according to you. So why do you think it's not karet? So he says, there's 3 verses. There's kol chametz gets karet, kol machmetzet gets karet, and then there's kol machmetzet lo tochelu. He says these are 3 different things. Okay, and now we're going to start with the pasuk about chametz. Chametz is coming to teach you one thing. Machmetzet is coming to teach you something else. Okay, and then we have the third verse, which is the second machmetzet, which is our verse, which is to teach you ta'arovet without karet. So we have 2 with karet, one with the word chametz, one with the word machmetzet, one without karet and with the word machmetzet. That must be talking about ta'arovet, and the other 2 are for other things. So now he says, and then we could say the machmetzet there is not the same as the machmetzet in our verse. So what does he need it for? L'chiditanya, as it says in the following Braita. Machmetzet, when it says this actually should say chametz. Okay, it's a mistake. It should be read as chametz. Chametz, and the verse about chametz, you get karet ein li ela shenit chametz me'elav. That's a dough that's self-rising dough. Okay, like a sourdough where you don't take an outside sourdough and put it into, but you actually just let the dough sit there and rise on its own. Machmat davar acher minayim. What if you brought something else external to help it rise? Okay, which could be maybe a sourdough starter from somewhere else, or it could be, we saw before, wine causes things to ferment, other items cause things to ferment. Let's say you used something else. Talmud lomar kol machmetzet v'nichrita. Therefore, it says kol machmetzet means anything you use. That's actually, we darshan this pasuk already to include other things that cause fermenting. So ihachi to lav nami lahachi uda'ata. So now they go back and okay. So we have. Let's just review. According to this answer, the chametz verse, again, we have 3 verses we have to explain. The chametz verse is talking about chametz that rose on its own. The machmetzet verse with karet comes to teach you if it used something else to leaven it, and then it rose, karet. The 3rd verse we're saying is for ta'arovet. But they say if the first 2 verses are all to teach you about a dough that rises on its own, or you need some other external thing to help it rise, it's karet. Well, if that machmetzet, now there's a rule in the Torah that You don't get punished unless there was a warning somewhere in the Torah saying, don't do this. So they say the verse that we're trying to say has to do with tarovet. Why don't you say that's coming to warn you that it's forbidden? That's the azhara, to say you cannot do this. And then the other verse tells you, and if you do it, you get karet. And maybe it's actually not referring to tarovet at all. Maybe it's referring to using some other ingredient to cause the dough to rise. That's what it means to lav nami lahachi uda'ata. Maybe the lo taseh is also coming to teach you about what you're going to be chayav karet for. Ella, so therefore you can't say it's from the words kol machmetzet lo tochelu. So what must it be from? Because the word machmetzet clearly seems to be referring to when you use some other item to cause the dough to rise. So therefore he says Talmud Lomar kol machmetzet. Talmud Rabbi Eliezer mikol. It's not from the word machmetzet, it's from the word kol. It says all machmetzet lo tochelu. The word kol, according to Rabbi Eliezer, we're going to see that there's machloket. Do you darshan the word kol or do you not? Does the word all come to include something additional? According to Rabbi Eliezer, it does. What is the word kol? When we said he learned it from kol machmetzet, we assumed it meant machmetzet, any kind, even if it's combined with something else. Now we're saying not from that word. We're learning it from the word kol, all. Okay, so they say, wait, that doesn't work either because hatam nami ktiv kol. By the verse before it, where it talks about karet, and what they keep coming back to is, Rabbi Eliezer, you don't make sense. If you think it's because of machmetzet, you should get karet. You shouldn't just say lo taseh. It should be karet. Because look at the verse before that. Kol machmetz, kol ochel machmetzet, v'nikrata nefesh shehi. Everyone who eats machmetzet should get karet. If you think machmetzet includes tarovet, in other words, the word kol in the pasuk, the last verse includes tarovet, a mixture. Then also kol ochel machmetzet should include a mixture. In which case, there it says karet. You should get karet for it. So he says, and here we get to women. This is going to be an interesting women's sugya. You might be a little surprised by this. If I asked you right now, before we go on the sugya, are women obligated to eat matzah? And is it forbidden for women to eat chametz? What would you tell me? Okay, obviously, yes. But not so obvious to the Gemara. Interesting. So the Gemara says, and if you're one of these people who shuts off the shiur before the end, you have to be very careful not to shut it off too early because you're going to come out misunderstanding. So here we go. They say, you need the kol and kol ochel machmetzet b'nichrita is to teach you women also get karet for this. Okay, now, I say, what are you talking about? Of course, who would have thought that women don't get karet for this? Why? Why would you have thought that women, of course, get karet? Because nashimi de Rav Yehuda Amarav nafka. We've already included women in all, right? Women are always forbidden by everything it says in the Torah, just like men. How do we know this? Okay, we just know it intuitively, but it says it right here. They're going to learn it from a drasha. Damar Rav Yehuda Amarav, v'chein tanad be Rabbi Yishmael. So Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, and it was also a bright from the house of Rabbi Yishmael. Amar Kra, the pasuk says, Ish o isha ki asu mikol chatot adam. This is a verse where it talks, we're going to learn this much more later in Shas. It's a verse that starts many times. It's all about a korban chatat, when you bring a sin offering. And it talks about someone who does a sin unwittingly, you bring a sin offering. So it says, Ish o isha. What do you see here? A male or a female. Hishva, katuv, ish lisha. They're totally comparable when it comes to sin offerings. So hishva, katuv, they made them equal. Ish isha, lechol onashim shebetorah, for all punishments. So of course they're included. So why would you need kol ochel machmetzet b'nichrita to include also women? So they say, no, you would need it. And here's the part where I say, be careful not to turn it off after I read this line. Itzrich. You need it. Why do you need it? You might have thought that what? It says, and we've compared these two parts of the verse many times. It says you can't eat chametz, you have to eat matzah. So what might you have thought? Kol sheyeshno b'kumachol matzah, only people who are obligated in matzah, yeshno b'bal tochal chametz, are also liable if they eat chametz. V'hanei nashe, and women, here's the important line. They are not part of the mitzvah of matzah. Okay, like I said, don't shut it now because you'll think the wrong thing. They are, but right now the Gemara suggests that they're not. It's a classic time-bound mitzvah. You have to eat matzah when? The night of the first night of Pesach. That's time-bound. Women should be exempt. So you might have thought, since they're exempt from matzah, you might have thought they're not included in the isur, the fact that it's forbidden to eat chametz. So, right, fascinating. You can imagine such a thing, right? That the men are eating no chametz and the women would be eating chametz, right? It would be hard to imagine that they're really not. But maybe they just wouldn't get karet, is what the Gemara is suggesting. Again, this is all just a suggestion. So because of that, this wherever we get here, because we said kol machmetzet lo tochelu includes ta'arovet. Ki kol ochel machmetzet v'nichrata, the one that talks about karet, the word kol doesn't include ta'arovet, a mixture. Why? Because that kol includes women. Why do you need to include women? Because you would have thought women were exempt because the time-bound mitzvah. Since they're not obligated in matzah, therefore they're not liable for eating chametz because those two are interconnected. Therefore comes the verse to tell you they're part of chametz, okay? They can't eat chametz. Once you get to there that they can't eat chametz, now they're going to make the comparison in the other direction. We tried to say maybe you learn from matzah, they're not obligated in matzah, therefore they're not liable for eating chametz. But now they're going to say, once you say they're included because of this word kol, they're now included in eating, you can't eat chametz, now they also become involved. They're also part of eating matzah. So women are obligated to eat matzah. It's not a time-bound mitzvah. It's one of the, it is time-bound mitzvah, but not one of the ones that women are exempt. It's another exception to the rule. There's many, many exceptions to the rule. Talked about this before, that it's unclear, right? There's so many exceptions, it's hard to understand the categorization even. And is the categorization specifically dependent because it's time-bound? Or maybe it was just a categorization that kind of said, oh, look at all the ones they're exempt from. We could sort of call, there's something unifying about them. They all happen to be time-bound. Anyway, that's a whole discussion. We'll get into that more when we get to Kiddushin and we learn that topic in depth. So anyway, they say, De Amar Rabbi Elazar. It should be Rabbi Elazar. It says Rabbi Eliezer. It should be Rabbi Elazar. So by the way, I see Becky, you're saying Nashima Yubo Toanes. That we learned for the 4 cups, not for matzah. Matzah we learn from here. And the 4 cups of wine, we're going to learn that when we get to our Pesachim. It's actually one of the things that we talk about we'll learn in the course more in depth, in the in-depth course, the skills class, about the 4 cups and the Afena Yubo Toanes. But that's not mentioned when it comes to Achilat Matzah. And I see, Shoshana, you're saying it's like Shabbat. It's right. It's the same idea as Shabbat. The same thing with Shabbat. There's a chor and shamor, and we compare whoever's in the positive is, whoever's in the negative is also in the positive, and that's where you learn that women are chayav in kiddush. It's the exact same language. Kol sheyeshno shmira, yeshno b'schira. Okay, it's the exact same thing here. So also here, because again, once you connect 2 things, there's a chor and shamor are connected because God said them in the same mouthful, so to speak, right? God doesn't have a mouth, but right, they were said at the same time when they were in Har Sinai, right? 2 versions of the 10 Commandments. One says Zachor Yom Shabbat, one says Shamor. Shamor means observe, which means don't do things, and Zachor means the positives. So they say what's true for one is true for the other, and that's why women are obligated in all the positive mitzvot about Shabbat. Here we're saying the same thing about the matzah and the chametz. It's just learned from the fact that these are juxtaposed in the verse. So now they say, Da'amar Rabbi Elazar, Nashim chayavot achilat matzah dvar Torah, shene'amar lo tochal alav chametz, kol sheyeshno b'bal tochal chametz, yeshno ba'achilat matzah. So here they're basically just quoting Rabbi Elazar, who says this explicitly. In others, the Gemara was suggesting this, and then they say, we have proof for this. Rabbi Elazar says exactly this. V'hanenashe, and these women, nami ho'il v'yeshna b'bal tochal chametz, since they're included in they're liable for eating chametz, yeshna b'kumeh chol matzah. Okay, therefore they're part of matzah. So this is all to say, kol ochel chametz machmetz, it comes to include women. Therefore, it doesn't come to include ta'arovet. So again, women will get karet if they eat actual chametz, but anyone, male or female, who eats a ta'arovet will only be forbidden by a lo ta'aseh, malkot, and not by karet. So they're still not satisfied with this whole thing yet. They say, umay chazit tahai kol l'rabuye nashim umafkat eruvo, ema l'rabuye eruvo. If you're going to say kol comes to include women and kol comes to include eruv, one in one verse, one in the other, it seems arbitrary. Why didn't you say that in the karet verse, it's including the ta'arovet, and in the non-karet verse, it's including women? Why did you do it specifically in that direction? So they have a very good answer. They say, mistabra, kai ba'ochlin marbe ochlin, kai ba'ochlin marbe ne'echalim. Look at that verse that we included women. It says, ki kol ochel, anyone who eats machmetzet, v'nechrata nefesh, you'll get karet. What's the subject? The subject is a person, any person. So when you're talking about person and you want to include something, you're obviously going to include a person and not a food item. When it says kol machmetzet lo tochelu, what's the subject? Food. anything that leavens. So there we're going to include food. So the way this is read is, if you're talking about ochlin, food, people who eat, you're going to be marbeh ochalim, people who eat. But if you're talking about people, kaiba ochlin, you're talking about people who eat, marbeh ne'echalim, you're going to include food. That doesn't make any sense. It's like a rhetorical question. But matkifla Rav Natan bar Avua, now this sounds very logical, but Rav Natan bar Avua, de Rav Huna, is going to question this. It's actually a bit of a girsa about who exactly it is. I'm not going to get into that, but anyway, he says, is that really true? I'm going to prove to you that that's not true. I'm going to show you a verse where the subject was a person, and what they included from ki kol, the same wording by us, or kol, the same wording by us, it's actually the same exact ki kol, ochel, it's the same exact wording. We're going to include food and not a person. Vahatanya, ki kol ochel chelev min habehema asher yakriv. If you eat the chelev, that's the forbidden fat, from an animal that you sacrifice. So what does it seem to talk about here? Animals that are sacrificed, which would be what kind of animals? Only animals that are unblemished. So first of all, this sounds like you're only talking about the fat from an animal that was supposed to be sacrificed. That was a perfect animal, no blemish. So the first thing we want to say is, how do you know forbidden fats from an animal that was supposed to be sacrificed but was blemished? How do you know it's also forbidden to eat that? Talmud lomar min habehema. So the same min habehema comes to include from the animal. Why did it need to say that? It was obvious we were talking about animals. It's chelev, comes from animals. So it must mean that comes to teach you an additional. What about chelev chulin? How do we know about any regular animal that wasn't designated as a sacrifice? You also can't eat the forbidden fats. Talmud lomar ki kol. So what do you see here? Ha ha dekai ba'ochlin. The subject was people. Kol ochel chelev, and you also, it says you get karet. V'kamar ben ne'echalim. And what does it come to include the word ki kol? Kol comes to include foods, not people. So they say, good answer. Hatem deleka ochlim mar ben ne'echalim. There was no choice. Kol, the subject was people, and it already included everybody. So there was no one else to include. So if it has no one else to include, right, by default, we'll go to the next thing, which is food items. But here we have two choices. One is going to include people, and one is going to include food. So obviously, we're going to take the verse that's talking about people and have it include people. And the verse that's talking about food is going to include food. And that's why, again, women are going to get karet, and mixtures are not going to be liable for karet. Now, what about going back? If you remember, I mentioned this before, we had this machloket with the rabbis. The rabbis don't think that there's a lo taseh when it comes to what do they do with kol machmetzet. If they don't think kol comes to include a ta'arovet, because they don't think there's a lo taseh involved, there's a negative commandment. So Rabbanan deletlu eruv kol lo darshe, right? So then, if they obviously, why don't they hold it? Because they don't think kol is a drasha. If they don't think kol is a drasha, then what are we stuck with? We had kol to learn, number one, the ta'arovet. We also had kol to learn women. The chachamim not learn women? So elanashim minalehu, where did they get women from? So they say, kol lo darshe, ki kol darshe. They don't darshe kol, but they do darshan the words ki kol, because it says because all. The verse about karet said because all. Okay, so because it had the word ki, it said that includes women. So then they say, wait, if you're going to say that there's a kol drasha and there's a ki kol drasha, now happens the rabbis don't hold by the kol drasha, they only hold by ki kol. But if you go back to Rabbi Eliezer and he holds kol, he must also darshan ki kol. If that's the case, you can learn two things from the karet verse. So they're obviously going to ask, Ema kol rabotet hanashim, ki kol rabotet eruvo. They keep going back to saying maybe Rabbi Eliezer should be learning karet if he's already including it. So again, kol comes to include the women. We said it wasn't free to include the ta'arovet, the mixture. But if you're going to say ki kol is a possibility, as another drasha, we could say kol includes the women, ki kol includes the mixture. So the chitema ki kol Rabbi Eliezer lo darish. If you want to suggest maybe he doesn't darshan this, not true, he does, because it says vahatanya in a totally different topic. It's not totally different, but it's different. Here we're talking about a korban mincha. Korban mincha, the verse says, any mincha that you sacrifice can't be chametz. Ki kol seor v'kol dvash lo taktiru. The exact words here. Ki kol, because all leavened items and honey cannot be brought on the altar. So they say here, here's a drasha. Now, what we're going to prove is this must be Rabbi Eliezer, because whoever's going to darshan here darshans kol and darshans ki kol. And we already said the rabbis don't darshan kol, they only darshan ki kol. So here you're going to have someone who darshans both. So you're going to prove that it must be Rabbi Eliezer, and he darshans both. So what do you see? Ainli ela kulo. Okay, so hatanya, sorry, it says in a Braita, or bal taktiru, you can't burn it. Ainli ela kulo. This is only maybe if the whole kmitza, what do? They take a dough, they make a dough. The Kohen puts his 3 middle fingers in, he dips them in, and then he brushes off the sides with his 2 outer fingers, and then that's the part you burn. So it sounds like kol or maybe the whole thing. What if he only burns part of it on the mizbeach and it happens to have leavening agent in it? So Talmud Lomar, or it happens to have leavened. Talmud Lomar kol. Therefore, it says kol to say even mixato, even part of it. A ruvominayin, how do you know if there's a mixture of 2 things? Let's say you have a kmitza that was good and a kmitza that was bad, and as one had leavened, one hadn't, and you burn them at the same time together. Talmud Lomar ki kol. So here you see they darshan kol to teach you one thing, and ki kol to teach you another thing. Man shamalei de darish kol, and who's the one who darshans kol? Rabbi Eliezer. Vikadarish ki kol. So if that's the case, we're back to our question. Rabbi Eliezer, if he darshans kol to include women, he should darshan ki kol to include tarovet, which means tarovet should be karet. And the Gemara ends with, sorry to leave you like this, kashya. In fact, after all this time, we just spent the entire Amud dealing with Rabbi Eliezer. They say, in fact, his position is difficult because he should theoretically darshan ki kol also, and then it should even be karet. But we're left with a difficulty. We're going to end here for today. Have a Shavua Tov.